Houston and Oklahoma meeting up once again. Will this one be a classic like some of the past ones? I guess it probably depends who we ask.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a crossover edition of Locked On Cougs and Locked On Sooners. I'm one of your hosts, Parker Ainsworth, joined by John Williams of Locked On Sooners. John, I got to ask, and I'm going to ask about 2016 because I'm going to act like no other games have happened. Do you remember where you were when that game happened? I mean, how shocked were you back then?
So 2016, very shocked, actually. You know, we were here in the States. We were kind of in between our times. We were living in Ethiopia, but we came back because my daughter was born that year. And so actually I might be fever dreaming the 2016 season because, you know, she was like 5 months old, probably when that Houston Oklahoma game took place. So it's a vague memory. But that whole start to the season was really, really weird, having the two losses in the first few games of the year, just kind of setting some things back. But I mean, Baker and the crew rallied and put together a Big 12 title run anyway.
Well, I mean, I can remember going ecstatic when the kick return, the kick return, field goal return, going nuts.
Yeah, the kick
six. And that's the only time Cincinnati's ever played. That's what I've been told unofficially is the only two times.
There's a rumor out there. Maybe Jalen Hurts had a big day, maybe 2019 or something. I don't know.
2019 is a blur. This year's game, I mean, the Vegas line is there on the screen. I think people are predicting to be very one-sided, but I do want to talk about where these teams are presently, kind of the journey they're going on presently, and then in my show on Wednesday, Locked On Coogs fans know I talked about how like 2024, this is this get matchup, and 2028 is a very direct comparison. And so I guess I want to get into all of that with you. But post week one vibes, you had a very different week one. You played Temple, a team Houston fans remember from the American Athletic Conference back in the day. Things appeared to click, forced 4 turnovers and stuff like that. What are the vibes around Norman after a big Temple win?
Yeah, so everybody's feeling great about the defense. You know, you force 6 turnovers, well, 5 of them on defense, 1 of those on special teams. You get 6 sacks, 9 tackles for loss. Everybody's feeling pretty good about the defense, but also understanding it's Temple. Like, Temple is one of the worst teams in the nation in returning production, one of the worst teams in the nation in SP plus ranking going into the season as well. So while everybody's excited and it kind of confirms some priors with Oklahoma's performance in that game, we still want to see more, right? We want to see how they perform this week against Houston, how they perform next week against Tulane, and then that September 21 matchup with Tennessee is the one that everybody's got circled in Sharpie on their calendars, because that's going to provide that first, like, okay, is this defense for real, or are they just kind of going to be okay? We'll find out then. Offensively, it's interesting because the defense set them up with so many short fields. The offense didn't really have to do much. I talked about it on our show earlier this week. Like, it's like when you were playing your kid brother and you knew you were going to beat him in any sport you played. And so you didn't have to pull out your whole bag of tricks. You could just sit at the 3-point line and jack threes all game, knowing that eventually you're going to hit enough of them and you're going to win, and you could just kind of do whatever you want. That's kind of what it was for Oklahoma. Now, they were terrible on third down. The starters were 0 for on third down. So that has a little bit of, concern following that game. The running game wasn't super consistent in the first half, really exploded and had a good second half, but the first half was not great. So offensively, kind of vibes are weird. People aren't quite sure how to feel about them just yet. The coaching staff said they were vanilla. Defensively, everybody's feeling great. They could do no wrong. We'll see where they land after they play Houston and if the vibes check out moving forward. What about for Houston? Because I mean, Willie Fritz, I mean, he's one of the hot names in college football after helping lead Tulane to, AAC titles. And, Oklahoma fans remember him back from the 2021 season when they got up huge on him, and then Tulane made it a game late. So a disappointing loss to UNLV, but I think there's probably still a lot of good buzz about Willie Fritz because it's just one game into his tenure.
Yeah, and you brought up the Tulane game against Oklahoma. I think he has every reason to not be scared of the city of Norman in a way that I think it's got a mystique around it that, frankly, both the University of Houston fans will remember. We mentioned 2016 and Willie. I don't think that they fear it the same kind of way other similar sized programs might.
For sure.
I do think, though, that there was a vibe in the post game of like, oh, this rebuild is going to take longer than we thought it was. And I don't mean to say like I was telling people that in some beat my chest kind of way, but a lot of talent did leave in the coaching change. Folks heard about NIL deals elsewhere. They were like, hey, I got a year or two left of college. I can't wait out this rebuild. I'm going to go get some wins done. I mean, Sam Brown scored touchdowns for Miami. Matthew Golden scored touchdowns for Texas. Chidozie Nwankwo started on the D-line for Colorado. Like they lost talented guys, right? I was bluntly disappointed. I've been harsh on them this week in my podcast and some of the offensive stuff that Houston put out there. They bring in a run-first coordinator. Their starting running back gets 2 carries. Like things don't make sense there. And so I think that you're going to see some maybe corrections this week. I have to be honest. Oklahoma is almost daunting more because of where their strengths lie to me as far as what people are worried about this week. There's a strong defense front in Oklahoma. Well, Houston is going to try to be more of an establish the run kind of team. This isn't really a get right week for that necessarily in the same kind of way that if the weeks had been inverse, they might have been, right? Similarly, I felt okay about Houston's defense. And if you're going to play a, top 25 teams offense, I don't know that Oklahoma's offense is the thing they're hanging their hat on right now. So those kinds of things are, I think, where people are like, what are we going to make out of this? What are we going to get out of this? I will say, I guess they play Rice in week 3. There are a lot of people worried about winning a single game this year after the loss to UNLV, just because they were kind of chalking that one up as when they'd win. And, I don't mean to talk about Oklahoma's past a whole lot, but, like Power 4 teams lose to Group of 5 teams in week 1 a couple times every year, right? Like this is not unheard of. I don't think we need to throw the baby out with bathwater and all of this. I'm excited about Fritz, is what I'm trying to get around to saying. And I think he's the right hire, just going to take a while. And people are realizing it's going to take longer now. Y'all made a coaching change a couple years back at this point now. What were the first couple years like under Venables? Because that was a pretty dramatic change. Frankly, not so long after another pretty dramatic change.
Yeah, so the Lincoln Riley thing was shocking. I still remember being at the park with my kids. It's like less than 12 hours after Bedlam had gone down and Oklahoma had lost that game. And I'm at the playground and I'm seeing this starting to pop across my timeline and my notifications are going crazy. I'm like, all right, kids, we got to go. And I got to go start writing because this is crazy times. It's what's happened. I still blame Lincoln Riley for ruining a perfectly good Sunday afternoon. But I think, Brent Venables coming in that first year, 6-7, not great. Nobody in Oklahoma's circles would tell you that was acceptable by any stretch of the imagination. Brent Venables would tell you it wasn't acceptable by any stretch of the imagination. But it was one of those, it was truly a turnover year. It was a defense that did not have any depth to it. You had 3 linebackers that played nearly 1,000 snaps on the season, which they were like the only linebackers that did that in college football. You only had safeties otherwise. And so, a lot has had to change from the Lincoln Riley era to the Brent Venables era. We started to see really positive signs last year. They go 10-3. They improve nearly a touchdown per game on defense. They go from 99th in scoring defense to 49th. Their defensive efficiency improves, where they're top 20 in several metrics. So the signs are showing that it's an improving product and an improving program. So much of what Brent Venables has been trying to be about is just establishing culture and establishing the right mindset in order to build what they hope will become a championship program. And that's the expectation at Oklahoma, is that you will contend for championships. Nobody is sitting here as they go into the SEC thinking, oh, well, now we're just hoping to get playoff berths. No, everybody's still expecting Oklahoma to at some point be an SEC title contender and a national title contender. So, going into year 3 with Brent Venables, I think there's still a lot of optimism. I think the minority opinion might still be one of cautious optimism about Brent Venables, but I think most people are encouraged by what we've seen take place.
Well, and I want to talk about, you mentioned transitioning to the SEC and how that doesn't change expectations. I kind of want to talk about expectations in this journey that both teams are feeling a lot of newness these days. But first, our buddies over at FanDuel want to remind you that it is the best time to make things exciting in the football season. And with the NFL kicking off this weekend, which is, I'm sure we're all excited about, getting pro football on Sunday is going to be nice. A full day of Saturday and full day of Sunday. They got something a little bit different going on right now. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5, get 3 weeks free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. I just got to have a YouTube TV base plan. You can watch TV with every regular season game on Sunday afternoons, out-of-market games, anything. All you need is a Google account, current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So you get a 3-week trial, cancel right after that. 3 weeks of free NFL Sunday Ticket. Visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the MLB. Crossover edition again. Locked on Cougs, Locked on Sooners, both here, chopping it up a little bit, talking about new journeys that these two programs are on. Right, Houston and Willie Fritz, I think, is kind of the more natural one. People talk about new coaches happen all the time in college football. Fritz, for a guy coming from Tulane, is a fairly well-respected coach in circles across the country. But I want to ask about this transition to the SEC because it feels weird to call this a non-conference game. Part of the reason Houston wanted to get in the Big 12 is to play schools that feel more local and close, like in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And now we're playing you as our Power 4 non-conference game. You mentioned Tennessee's coming up. You mentioned expectations. But what's this journey been like? Now you're an SEC program.
Yeah, first of all, shout out to the Houston administration for helping get you guys on the schedule. We needed a Power 5, Power 4 non-conference game, and Houston came through big time for that. So, it's fascinating because I remember when the first news broke back in, again, it was summer of 2021, that Oklahoma and Texas were going to go to the SEC. And I both had a lot of excitement and a lot of, I don't know, kind of bummed out feelings because I grew up watching Big 12 football. We were talking before the show. I'm from the Dallas-Fort Worth area too. And you watch a lot of Big 12 football being from DFW. And so not having some of those matchups over the last 10 years, even with Missouri and Nebraska and A&M and Colorado gone, it created a whole different vibe in the Big 12 anyway. But losing Bedlam, losing, some matchups with like Iowa State, I kind of grew to enjoy the game against West Virginia. That's an intriguing locale for college football, a really good college football town in Morgantown. And then when the expansion happened, I was like, this is what should have happened years ago under Bob Bowlesby. Like they should have been looking to add a program like a Houston where they get a good media market and an intriguing matchup that, again, has had some positive experiences against Oklahoma. So I wish they would have done the expansion thing 6 years ago and maybe kept Oklahoma in the Big 12, but now going to the SEC, I mean, it's hard not to be excited for it because you look at Oklahoma's schedule and there's a marquee matchup pretty much every single week. And even if like you look at South Carolina and okay, that's not a marquee matchup. I don't know if you got a chance to see Dylan Stewart this week, but that dude for South Carolina, true freshman 5-star edge, is every bit of a future first-round draft pick in the NFL. Probably top 5.
I love linemen. That dude does not look like a freshman. I can't believe people in the algebra class had to block him last year. I cannot believe that was a thing.
It's insane. And so, like, even though South Carolina as a team may not get you all excited and geeked up, getting a chance to watch that guy is going to get you excited. And I mean, Houston's had those kind of dudes too, and Ed Oliver and whatnot, but you're going to get more of that every single week with Oklahoma now in the SEC. So, I mean, fans are really, really excited and pumped about it. The coaching staff, the program, I mean, it's been a huge buildup for 3 years getting ready to go into the conference. It's kind of exciting, man. And I hate to kind of say that to my former Big 12 brethren, but it is. And you, as a college football fan alone, not having to wait till bowl season to get some of these big games, it's super fun, dude. And it's just super fun for football fans alone, set aside the Oklahoma fandom as well. Willie Fritz, man, like that's a well-respected coach. I know when Lincoln Riley left, like that was a name that popped up, as watch list kind of a guy for Oklahoma, ends up going to Houston where, hey, Houston is one of those programs that they could really provide a lot of support and a lot of backing. And there's a lot of financials that could be behind him. So there's a chance to grow that thing into something special.
Yeah, the deal will be getting the money that exists in the city of Houston to the University of Houston, right? That's always been the challenge is you got, UT Austin, Texas A&M, LSU, Oklahoma, right? All have alums in the city as well, and trying to get city folks to realize like this is the show in this town, right? And it's worth putting money in here. I will say that Willie Fritz strikes a chord with that old school audience, though. I mean, for whatever reason, there's a lot of Houston area that feels still like football is football is football, and like Willie Fritz is a football guy. He sounds like a football coach. He's always raspy. I was excited about the hire. My only complaint about the hire was that, he's on the older side of things. And are you looking at like a 5-year window and doing this all over again in 5 years? And frankly, he's had way more energy than I would have ever thought a guy in his mid-60s would have had coming in. He's not. I kind of anticipated more like the GM kind of guy that's just in charge of it all because he is a little bit older. And he is, I mean, drenched in sweat, screaming, yelling. He's got a microphone out at practice when his voice goes out. I mean, he is a lot more energetic, I think, than certainly than I was going to give him credit for. I think he's the right guy to lead the program. I think the journey we're on right now is a lot of guys got off the bus when he got to town. So now you got to get the right guys on the bus, get them in the right seats, and then get the thing moving in the right direction. And we're still kind of at step one at that, getting guys on the bus. Dude, turn Tulane into something. And I've expressed it, but I don't know if you're sooner. I mean, that he made Tulane a respectable program, let alone a conference champion, is pretty remarkable, right? Mm-hmm. He did a national championship level work at Sam Houston State, did well at Blinn, all in this area. And so you got to think that there's some good mojo there, good recruiting connections, et cetera. And so I say all to say I'm excited about it.
Yeah, should be.
I think he's a great coach, and I don't know how you feel about Venables personally. I would like to hear at some point, I think of Venables, because I feel like he's long overdue for the Power 4 thing. Y'all didn't take him. You stuck with your own D coordinator, kind of. I guess you brought him back.
Right. Yeah, no, everybody, I mean, we talked about Willie Fritz being on the short list. I think Brent Venables was the list. When this happened, Joe Castiglione and Joseph Harraz, the AD and the president, they made it pretty quick. I mean, it did not take long for them to figure it out who they wanted to be their next head coach. All it really took was the program showing Brent Venables like, hey, we're ready and willing to invest like we need to invest as an SEC program to make Oklahoma one of the best in the nation from a facility standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, from a salary standpoint, all of it. And so it was kind of he was their number one target, and he had waited for a really, really long time to get a head coaching job. I mean, he'd been coaching as an assistant for over 30 years in college football before taking a head coaching job. And the last 20 plus years as a defensive coordinator, and someone who'd been on many, many people's short lists. But he talked about how it had to just be the right fit, the perfect fit from an administrative standpoint, from a location standpoint, a program standpoint, and having that familiarity with Oklahoma made a big, big difference in that. And so, we're pumped, man, that Brent Venables is here because he's an Oklahoma guy, even though he went to Kansas State, played under,
don't hold that against him is what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, he's a Kansas State guy, but I mean, he came with Bob Stoops over here and was a part of that national title, team, and the coaching staff that helped get them to several BCS national title games before going to Clemson. And he's going to help get Oklahoma back to what it wants to do and be a very, very good defensive football team. So there's a lot to be excited about with Brent Venables, even though they go into an SEC where they're not the favorite, which is kind of a weird place to be for Oklahoma.
The other people we make sure we talk to you about a little bit today before we move on, before we get into roster conversations, it's about building a championship roster of your own. The place to do that is LinkedIn Jobs. You're hiring for your small business. You're going to find quality professionals that are the right person for that role. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs are the tools you need to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just on their job board. It helps you find and hire professionals you cannot find anywhere else. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. You can hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing thin because they have so many guys wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resource to hire like a bigger company. But LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make that process easier. They just launched a feature that helps you find and write job descriptions, making the process even quicker and easier. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, this is a crossover edition of Locked On Cougs and Sooners one more time with John Williams and Parker Ainsworth. John, I'm scared of some guys like Marcus Strong in this matchup. I'm not so terribly scared of the matchup as a whole, as I mentioned earlier, but I do think it's kind of thing where the Oklahoma front seven is going to make a big difference here. Tell me what names I need to know.
So Marcus Strong's a good one, but he's like on the 3 deep at defensive tackle. He didn't get into the game until like the last drive for Temple and came away with 2 sacks. So that's kind of what you're dealing with when you're talking about Oklahoma. This was a team that desperately needed to retool its defensive tackle group, and they've done so in a phenomenal way. Dominic Williams was one of the hot names in the spring transfer portal window. They bring him in. He's starting at the nose tackle position for you. Jayden Jackson was a guy that was kind of under the radar for a lot of his recruitment in the 2024 cycle, but really picked up a lot of buzz when David Stone started dropping his name and making sure people knew, like, hey, watch out for this guy. The only reason I'm so good is because of this dude. And a true freshman defensive tackle has earned a starting role on Oklahoma's defense, the first time that that's happened since Tommy Harris in the early 2000s. So Dominic Williams, Jayden Jackson, 2 dudes on the defensive tackle spot, followed by Grayson Halton, who came through with a big game, had a sack and a half, a forced fumble. David Stone, the former 5-star freshman that is kind of getting his feet wet in college football and still has, a lot of things he's got to kind of work on, but has all the talent to be a dominant force in the middle. And then the edge room has been solid over the last couple of years under Brent Venables, with Ethan Downs, 4.5 sacks each of the last 2 years. But what they've really needed is more juice off the edge. We talked about Dylan Stewart in the last segment. Oklahoma hadn't really had a guy that brings the speed rush off the edge over the last couple of years. Well, they've been waiting on a guy like R. Mason Thomas, who is now healthy, been dealing with injuries his first 2 years on campus, but he's healthy and looks like he's ready to contribute at a high level for the Sooners. And then you go to the linebacker core, man, and it is just absolutely stacked. You got Danny Stutsman, a preseason All-American, preseason All-SEC selection by both the media and the coaches. He's going to be a top 50 pick in the NFL draft. It just depends on does a team like him enough to take him in the first round or in the early part of the second round when it comes to him. But they've got a group of 2022 4-star prospects or 2022 4-star signees in Kip Lewis, Kobe McKenzie, and Jaron Kanik, who kind of had quasi breakouts last year, but are really now significant parts of Oklahoma's defense or linebacker rotation, along with a guy like Lewis Carter, who was a 2023 4-star prospect. So, and Samuel Masigo, a 2023 4-star prospect. So,
all right, I've already heard a lot of names. I don't know about
that's the front seven. Man. That's the front seven. They're rotating dudes. They're going to get a lot of guys involved, man. It's the best it's been under Venables, and maybe the best it's been since Venables was here before.
Well, and so I think that's kind of my thing is I mentioned earlier, I think the matchup here is interesting in that Oklahoma's strength will be Houston's weakness, and the places Houston should be able to exploit Oklahoma, like Oklahoma's weakness, are maybe the things that, honestly, I think Houston was always going to do well. I feel comfortable with Houston's defense, but talk to me about that offensive line, because where I think of Houston's defensive line as being a strength, Keith Cooper, key Tulane transfer, came over with Willie Fritz. He's a pretty big playmaker over there. The Oklahoma offensive line is a lot more question marks from their defensive front.
Yeah, and that's what I want to know from you is, because Oklahoma's offensive line kind of struggled with Temple a little bit, and not in a way that's like, oh, okay, they can fix it by just adding a couple bodies. No, it's got to get better in a significant way. They had Jake Taylor, their starting right tackle. He was out last week. They lost Branson Hickman, their starting center, in the first quarter to an ankle sprain. Both those guys should be back for this week. But What is it about Houston's defensive line that kind of gives you some confidence? You talked about Cooper as a potential playmaker up front, but I mean, there's a chance that could be an opportunity for Houston to kind of assert itself in this game.
So I like Keith Cooper a lot. He's a defensive end, a probable pro, transfer from Tulane to Houston with Willie Fritz, I think, to have a better shot. Tulane, I think, would just been hard just from a visibility standpoint. They have Brandon Mack. He's an edge rusher, quasi. They call it a dog. It's kind of a hybrid position between a linebacker and a defensive end. He's an Ole Miss transfer from a year ago. He's played some SEC football before. He kind of understands the show. He looks the part every bit. And then, honestly, the other guys say that gets out of the passer is actually a linebacker. Michael Batten gets really involved in the run game and stuff, and he's just so shifty and quick. He's not very big. He transferred into Houston from most recently Louisiana Monroe, but he just evades guards really well. He's just shifty enough to evade guards in that interior spot as a linebacker. On the whole, I think the secondary is probably stronger as far as things go. Houston's defense, I think, though, they gave up 27 points to UNLV, but I would stress folks that look at that score maybe don't know a lot about UNLV that they were hanging 35 and 40 the last couple of years on folks.
It's a good offense.
The go-go offense Brennan Marion runs is very real. And that 7 of those points came on a Donovan Smith pick 6. So that's not even necessarily the defense's fault either. And I mentioned it after the game on my Monday and Tuesday reaction shows that I thought Houston's defense, unfortunately, is getting lumped into the catastrophe that was last weekend because they played pretty well, honestly.
You only give up 20 points to that offense. I think that's a win for your defense.
I think so too.
You only give up 20 points in college football, and you should win games. So that brings me to the offense. Like, what's up with the offense? And Donovan Smith's a guy that Oklahoma fans are familiar with from his time at Texas Tech. I've always kind of been high on him, but it just hasn't really seemed to click down there in Houston.
Yeah, and CBS even had him as a potential dark horse draftee, like a top 10 quarterback pick in the NFL draft kind of guy. He looks the part, 6'5", 245, walks in the room, looks every bit the part. And frankly, at Tech, he ran a lot more. I thought we were getting more of a dual threat kind of guy. He ran over linebackers, big, strong runner, Josh Allen type of runner. He's not Josh Allen, but Josh Allen type of runner, right? And then at Houston, they really haven't put him out running a whole lot. We found out after the season last year that he hurt his shoulder, and so he was playing with the hurt shoulder. Then the coaching change happens, and he misses spring ball healing that hurt shoulder. He had surgery on his labrum. And I think that kind of set him back. And I'm not saying that I hadn't said yet this week. I thought he looked worse in the first game this year than he did at any point last year. And that's either new offense, no spring ball, whatever the case may be. He looked uncomfortable. I was disappointed in that. I thought I was going to see more progression there. And then, frankly, it was year 2 with this offensive line coach, and I guess it is a new system. I felt like he was under a lot of pressure and duress, which, again, it takes me back to the fear I have in this front seven. If this thing turns into a blowout that FanDuel thinks it might, I don't think it's going to be a blowout in my head. We can get to picks if you want, but I do think that would be because the OUD line just eats, right? I think that would be the deal here, is if it gets to be that kind of a chaotic day. Houston brought in Kevin Barbay, the offense coordinator from Mississippi State last year and App State the year before that. And I think everyone kind of anticipated running the ball a lot more. Starting running back got 2 carries last week. Backup running back got 4. I don't know if they'll kind of regress back to more of a normal load. I don't know what to expect this week out of that. But that was certainly a surprise as well when talking about offensive problems last week. I don't know if the OU front seven is the get-right group for that, or if it's the kind of group that you pass behind on quick passes because you don't want the ball near those guys. If Houston were to do something miraculous this weekend, and I'm not saying it's off the table, I'd imagine they have to win a low-scoring game just because of where their deficiencies lie, though.
Yeah, I think that sounds reasonable. Oklahoma's offense, again, got a lot of short fields. They didn't really have to exert themselves very much this past week. Probably going to have a bit more of a challenge this week, especially our offensive line versus Houston's defensive line. That seems like it's going to be a key matchup. And I mean, that's generic football, right? The guys that win in the trenches usually win the games. Ask Tom Brady about the New York Giants. So, I think But where Oklahoma, I think, has a chance to kind of exert itself is on defense. And if the defense is able to keep Donovan Smith uncomfortable, then Oklahoma's offense may not have to try to do too much. They can just kind of play a defensive game and eventually let their playmakers be more than enough for them to kind of take over from there.
One last name that Sooner fans need to know, because you may help us make a decision here, is people love Uyale, the third string quarterback who last year was the backup quarterback. He came in a Sam Houston State blowout last year, threw a big time touchdown pass. He came in last week in garbage time, threw the only Houston Cougar touchdown pass. He had a couple other kind of similar moments last year, and they weren't all great in garbage time last year either. But people like him. He's about 5'10", lefty, and he makes decisions quick. They might not always be the right decision. He makes decisions quick. And I think people like that change. So maybe we're talking about a different guy next week. I don't know. I don't know that I would jump the gun that fast, but I certainly got fans in comment sections every day asking for it. So maybe we'll see it this weekend. Who knows, John?
Yeah, Oklahoma is no stranger to quarterback changes. I mentioned West Virginia. They were in Morgantown just a couple years ago, and they were facing – oh man, who was the former 5-star quarterback that was the starter for West Virginia then? I can't think of his name, but they were just teeing off on the dude because he was just so immobile. And then they bring in Garrett Green in the second half, another 5'10", white quarterback that can move and he makes quick decisions with the ball. And Oklahoma ended up losing that game to the Mountaineers. So, man, you just never know. Willie Fritz might decide to get in his bag and just throw a changeup at Oklahoma's defense.
Well, on the quarterback spot, not that I anticipate you'll making a change this weekend. Last word, I want to hear about Jackson Arnold, because I don't know anything about this kid outside that he was a crazy high-ranked recruit. He's your quarterback. You mentioned he's starting this year and that they didn't have a whole lot of tests last weekend. What's your read on the kid? Because I can't get one because I haven't seen him play a lot.
I think he's going to be great. I really do. And my, Locked On Sooners listeners and followers, they know my stance on it. I'm very, very optimistic about his potential with the Oklahoma Sooners. He has the size, he's got the arm strength, he's got the accuracy, he's got the intangibles. He's a quieter kid than some of the quarterbacks they've had in recent years.
But to be fair, you couldn't be louder than Baker.
No, you couldn't be louder than Baker or more flamboyant than Spencer or Caleb. But he's just kind of understated. He just kind of goes about his business. I think a lot of people looked at the Alamo Bowl game where he had 4 turnovers against Arizona and decided to kind of make that who he was as a quarterback. But I think that's really short-sighted, and it doesn't really give him the opportunity for, hey, let's have an offseason where I get to go actually be the starting quarterback. And he looked solid, man. He didn't throw for a big yardage number against Temple, threw for 141 yards, I believe, but he threw for 4 touchdowns, and pretty much every throw was on the money. He had, 8 incompletions, but 4 of those were drops. One of those was like just off the fingertips to a slight wide receiver. So he's got all the tools to go to the NFL and be a starting quarterback at the NFL level. He's a very, very athletic quarterback. He can run really, really well. And man, he's just got a rocket for an arm. He just makes it look really, really easy. A lot of it's just going to depend on, one, can the offensive line hold up long enough for them to get some deeper passing concepts going? And 2, will a depleted wide receiver depth chart come through for him? Because they're missing a guy like Nick Anderson, who was an 800-yard receiver and 10 touchdowns for them last year. Drake Stoops went off to the NFL. They're trying to get Angelo Anthony back, who was leading Oklahoma in receiving up until the Texas game when he blew out his ACL and was lost for the year. They lost Jayden Gibson for the year. They've lost Jaleel Farouk, who was a senior on this team, had 600 yards receiving for 6 to 8 weeks due to a broken foot. So the wide receiver depth chart for Oklahoma is decimated. But you got a Deion Burks, who was a highly sought after transfer, 3 touchdowns last week. If they can continue to open him up and get him deeper involved in the passing game, they'll be just fine. But Arnold, dude, he's incredibly talented, and he's a good kid too. Easy to root for.
Well, and I'll root for him a lot of weeks besides this one. How about that?
Yeah.
That's John Williams. I'm Park Ranger. You can follow him at John9Williams on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it these days, I guess. I'm at Painsworth512 wherever you get social media. I'm going to leave predictions to folks to find us both on Friday's episode, mostly for the intrigue. And I also don't know that we'll agree on some of that stuff. But that's Locked On Cougs, Locked On Sooners crossover. Thank you again so much. Thank you again to John for joining this as well. Locked On Cougs and Locked On Sooners are both proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network. If you're looking for a second listen of the day, go check out Spencer over at Locked On College Football. Thanks again, folks. Go Cougs.